Yeah, Mayor Bloomberg's trying to run for president.
Yeah, I saw that. Hello, everyone. I believe we are streaming. I am not recording for some reason, so I hope this is going out. Yes, it looks a little bit different, and this is going to be janky because I'm running this from Linux for the first time, so we'll see how this works. So far, we've got Chris and Pip. How are you guys doing?
Eh.
Oh, now you're clamming up.
Yeah.
Wouldn't shut up in the pre-game show. That's how it is.
Yeah.
It's hot
I
and
don't know what
humid
to
in Australia, so I'm slightly less talkative than usual.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's summer down there.
For those who don't know, Pipsqueak's homeland is on fire and it's under quarantine. So
You guys are
It's
having it
not as
rough
much-
this summer. This is not it's not a good time to be an Australian.
It's not as fire as it was a week ago, but we've also got flooding, so you know.
to be fair, it doesn't help the fact that the Australian government is blowing the coronavirus out of control. Oh, 3 people died. Oh my God, we've got the bubonic plague on our hands. Well, it's sad those people are dead, but compared to how many people die from other diseases.
I don't know. Looking at the most recent figures coming out of China, it's like, yeah, we kind of don't really want it to start.
Yeah, by the way, Shane, I saw this one funny meme about the coronavirus, which shows a picture of a poor African guy. I think it was during the malaria outbreak, and there was like a guy in a hazmat suit next to there, and the guy's like, "What's going on? Why is everyone wearing those suits?" And the guy's like, "Oh, an extremely deadly and highly contagious government bioweapon got leaked in. There's a nasty flu going around."
All right, the chat is like incredibly big. I'm gonna have to see if I can.
Wow. Yeah.
Hopefully, pulling up Firefox will not be too much for this. It shouldn't be, but I like having as many resources as possible when I'm.
Yeah, Shane, about coronavirus, even though we know it's not a bioweapon, considering the fact that China, the UK, and the Soviet Union experimented with a lot of bioweapons, I honestly can't blame people for thinking that, because you'd be surprised how much nasty germs the Soviets and the Chinese experimented with during the Cold War.
Honestly, I think the adage of if evidence equally supports either one, assume stupidity over malice.
Yeah.
Or sorry, incompetence over malice.
Yeah.
I still think like
Hanlon's razor,
someone
yeah.
was screwing around with this thing in a research lab and it got out. That's
I don't know.
to
It
me,
looks
that's
like
the most credible explanation of what actually happened.
it looks like it's too closely related to bat coronavirus. It's much more likely to be just a strain of bat coronavirus that got out.
Sorry, I was. Let me preface that with if that research thing with the horribly chosen logo.
There's that.
I think that's more likely.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know,
rather than deliberate.
Yeah, for those that don't know, there's contrary to popular belief, it's not a virus lab, rather it's a genealogy lab that studies genetics and all that. And it has a logo that is almost identical to the logo from the fictional Umbrella Corporation from the Resident Evil series.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. It's pretty funny because I never understood why they were called Umbrella, because I'm like, that's a weird name for that. But then I found out that in real life, an umbrella corporation is also a term used to describe a business that has a very vague logo, so you don't 100% know what they're doing. A perfectly good example is the company that manufactured Segway. They didn't call it Segway; they called it It.
Yeah, well, the Umbrella Corporation is just like ABC Incorporated is the umbrella corporation of Google and Boston Dynamics and all these others. They're a corporation that's just basically there to own other corporations.
Yeah, and that's like Disney, and which by the way is failing from what I've heard.
Yeah, I saw that and was sort of interested, and then I saw people starting to make anagrams with raccoon seed. It's like, right, well, as soon as you start doing that, I've lost all interest.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I don't get why people
I
still
don't.
are still like, oh yeah, zombies are real. The government's just hiding it up. It's like, do you know anything about biology? No. Do you know how viruses work? No. Then how do you know a zombie virus is real?
Well, the origin of zombies is actually in a voodoo ritual where the point was to cause deliberate brain damage to make someone compliant.
Well, that's another thing that people fail to realize. Contrary to popular belief, voodoo was never about zombies. Originally, were
Okay, I think I've got the chat looking better there. Oh, I am? Oh, I'm getting an echo of myself from somewhere. Hang on. Something happened with the audio now. All right, how does this sound? Does this sound better? Okay. All right. I don't know if I think I messed up the audio again. Hang on. Yeah, that's my fault. Hang on, I need to figure out what I did. Da, 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 da. Yeah, somehow my microphone is also coming through the desktop audio, so I need to figure out what just happened. Okay. In my recording devices. All right, that looks good. Yeah, no one heard that, but whatever he was talking about, everyone, it'll be on the next podcast. Let's see. I gotta say something now, Chris. Yeah, I'm not seeing you on the meter. No one can hear you. Dang it! This was working 2 minutes ago. All right, let's see.
I made it myself, but before I made it, I picked my nose and didn't wash my hands.
Hey, they just heard that.
Okay.
I think I found the right one there.
Okay.
I might have
I
to.
was just playing around. I didn't actually send any pizza to you. I don't do that anymore.
All right.
I quit that a long time ago.
And hopefully the levels are sounding good too. They're looking up in the orange here.
Yeah, that's it's
right.
really it's sadly just but despite their attempt, it's really difficult to find work these days. It's like, I'm legitimately trying to find work, but it's like everywhere I try to apply to, they either want they either want a useless college degree or they want at the very least 2 years of bibbity boppity boo experience before applying.
Yep.
Well,
I
how
need
am I?
experience.
What?
Work. I need experience to get work. Then get experience. But I need work to get experience.
That's
Yeah.
because of minimum wage. You can't undercut the people who do have experience.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like an old man, but if I recall correctly, back in the old days, like if you went up to, to a computer, business and whatnot, and you really liked computers, but you didn't have a college degree, they'd say, well, we don't really have anything for you, but look, we'll pay you $2 an hour to, to basically, back up files and all that. We'll show you how to do that. They'd give you something like that, and you'd slowly build your way up, but you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, especially considering how much those jobs pay now.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. It's like you have to go to college for everything now, whereas historically you only went to college if you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Well, and it's a problem now because, and this has pretty much been the case for more than a decade, it's still the fact that one of the reasons why we don't have the manufacturing jobs is because we don't have people to fill them, because not enough people are going to trade schools to learn how to be skilled manufacturing workers, welders, machinists, people like that.
Trade schools are a better alternative, but I still don't want to go there simply because the sad truth is I hate school. I don't want to go back and have to sit down in a lecture for several hours a day for 2 years. That's another thing. Why the heck do some of those trade schools? Why do their courses have to be like several years when, like, if you actually studied it from nonstop, you could complete it within a couple of weeks, and that can easily be stretched out to less than a year. But, gotta make money somehow.
Eh, what I
Hello,
miss?
Socks.
It's me, Shane.
Oh, Daniel, how you doing?
That's Daniel. Yeah, he changed his name.
Ah,
Yeah,
It's a reference to a show called Shimonetta.
Agent 69. 69.
That's kind of the point. SOX is an organization dedicated to spreading indecency and obscenity the world over.
Oh, JC Armitage says, don't forget that minimum wage also overworks the people who are lucky enough to keep their jobs. Oh, yes, definitely. You see it all the time. The reason why people are often cranky at those workplaces is because they're under stress and their manager is like, okay, you need to serve the customers, get this done, do this, do that, and you all have to do it in a timely manner.
well, and that's
have-
like at my wife's work, they cut back the hours for all of the cashiers and everything because they say, okay, we don't have enough, money to pay them all to, work them as many hours as we have been. So what does that mean? That means it falls on my wife, who's now overworked, and she's supposed to be doing customer service, but she's running registers and getting carts and all that.
And I largely blame the minimum wage for why I got laid off from a job that I really actually enjoyed doing because they were experiencing a down period and they weren't making as much money. And because I was a temp, they had to let me go. Whereas there's no doubt in my mind, had there not been a minimum wage, they would have been like, okay, well, here's the thing, Chris, we're going to have to cut your pay. But if you're willing to stick with us, until we get busy again, we can assign you to a menial job. You'll only be making like, a few dollars an hour, but you'll still be working with us. And then when we get busier again, we'll put you back in your old post. But they can't do it now because they can't afford it. They're not allowed to legally.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been able to get around that by making them contractors, making them 1099s. And California now has a law in place basically making that illegal, or not quite illegal, but really, really difficult to hire contractors and freelancers. And those same politicians are wanting to pass that nationwide.
Yeah.
Well, here in Australia, there was recently a famous celebrity chef who got done in on not paying workers it's called the award rate, which is basically just minimum wage. The Australian Fair Work Commission, which is a government entity, essentially sets levels of wages depending on industry, how long you've worked, qualifications, etc. And celebrity chef just got hit with a massive lawsuit that he's now been found guilty with underpaying workers. Institute of Public Affairs did a study on the hospitality industry and found that 50% of businesses, particularly small businesses, do not pay the award rate. The union, I can't remember which union it was, the unions did another one, they found like 90%. And this is absolutely not surprising with a labor-intensive industry and a low profit margin industry such as the hospitality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, you have people that are passing all of, and they just either they don't think through the consequences or they know the consequences and that's really what they want. But yeah, I mean, unions are one of the worst things for small businesses.
yeah, that's another thing I hate about unions because I was having a conversation with animation about people, and we were talking about this forgotten pilot for Nickelodeon called Constant Pain, and it's really good. And people were ranting and raving because it's like, it was a good pilot, but Nickelodeon canned it because the writer wanted to unionize, and Nick was anti-union. So I did a little research, and it turns out I'm like, actually, from what I read, the real reason why he was fired wasn't because he wanted to unionize, rather it was because he wanted them to be unionized under the Writers Guild of America. And I'm like, I can't blame Nick for that because the Writers Guild of America, they're very bad from what I've read. I've heard from some insiders that they are a bad union to work with because basically let's put it this way: when they launched that massive strike from 2007 to 2008, a lot of good hardworking people lost their jobs and many great shows got unnecessarily canceled because of their outrageous demands.
And a lot of
On
them
the
that
other side-
weren't saw like, they were only made. This was like they were making ordinarily like 22 episode seasons, and they could only make like 16 because of the writer's strike.
On the
Yeah.
bright side, we got Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog.
Yeah.
And Whose Line was fine.
Yeah.
It's nice when you don't have writers. That's what
Yeah.
Arguably, Whose Line was doing better than it is today.
Yeah. Well, it was on ABC and now it's on the CW, so that makes a difference.
Yeah, and actually going back to being short-staffed and all that, that's also why a lot of hospitals are short-staffed. It's because of government regulations. And actually, Pip, this kind of pertains to what you were talking about earlier with the coronavirus and the fires. I have a friend in a different who's also in Australia, and one of the reasons why I wanted to nominate Australia for Idiot of the Extraordinaire last week was because
I was going to say, Idiot of the Year seems a little premature.
because the guy's wife, she and several of her head nurses were at a hospital that had one of the patients for the coronavirus, and apparently after they were done working, they were told, "Oh no, you can't go home yet." It's like, what do you mean? We just worked a 12-hour shift. What's going on? Well, because you worked with the patient that had coronavirus, despite the fact that you were wearing the protection and all that, we got to quarantine you for 24 hours. And they're like, okay, we can do that. 24 hours is almost up. They're like, oh yeah, we're gonna need to quarantine you for another 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, people need to understand that the reactions you have to this have ramifications too. I mean, yes, you want to consider the morbidity and the mortality, but you also want to consider all the problems that are going to have from doing things like that or shutting down cities. Something like, what is it, 60 or 70 million people in China can't leave their city? Something like that.
Yeah. Contrary to what a lot of TV shows like to show, the idea of when a deadly virus breaks out, the military going in with the hazmat team and forcibly quarantine it. A lot of experts actually say that contrary to what you would think, that's actually the worst way to contain an infection.
Like Outbreak, Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah.
Was it a government hospital death that happened in?
No, I think it was a private hospital, but from what I read, the Australian, while it's not as bad as the United States, it's still overly regulated by the government, so therefore a lot of hospitals...
most hospitals are public hospitals that are actually
so
owned by...
Wouldn't surprise me. I don't know.
That's why I asked.
I don't know. I didn't want to ask him too much because he was under a lot of stress from it, but I was just telling him, it's like, what, dude, I'm gonna have to nominate the Australian government and also China for that because that is just bull crap.
Well, we've also talked about that with Fukushima because they didn't need to. I mean, you could probably say okay, evacuate people in the surrounding area for a couple of months while you wait for radioactive iodine levels to go down. You didn't even really need to do that, but I could see that just kind of as a precaution. But I mean, just the massive area that they did, and they're still not allowed to go home when there was no radiation released into the environment. It's ridiculous, and people are dying of heart attacks, and they have all sorts of problems from malnutrition and stuff like that because they've been living like refugees for 9 years.
It's because the government doesn't have to deal with the consequences.
Yep.
They make these big sweeping changes to look good, and then they don't have to deal with it.
JC Armitage, do quarantines actually prevent the spread of disease and viruses? From what I've researched, it's yes and no, because yes, quarantines, and isolation can prevent it from spreading, but you have to execute it very carefully. If you do what a lot of, medical dramas portray, which is have the military come in and force everyone into houses and all that, that's going to backfire huge for two reasons. One is that it's going to force everyone to be close together, which is going to spread the virus. And two, it's going to create a mistrust and a conflict, and people aren't going to have an incentive to try to, understand and wait out the quarantine. They're going to be like, oh my God, the military's coming in and declaring martial law. I got to get out of here.
Well, they say that's one of the reasons.
You're increasing the risk that an infected person gets out, which is completely counterproductive.
Well, they say that's one of the reasons why the bubonic plague was so bad in Europe, was because they thought it was a judgment from God, and so they all went and huddled into the churches and prayed with each other, and that just put them in proximity to each other, and that just spread the plague around more.
Yep. And also say... sorry, Daniel.
Well, you can't really blame that too much. That also came from a time when people thought diseases were spread by something called miasma.
I mean, they didn't know, but the disease doesn't care what you know. It's just how it happens.
Yeah. And the imbalance of the humor. Actually, that's actually why a lot of people believe that Poland and a lot of Eastern European nations were less suffered from during the outbreak, was because they were mostly farming communities, and a lot of them were Jewish, so they didn't have the same type of, beliefs as the Christian nations, so they weren't doing that.
Holy cow, when was humorism debunked?
The humorism? Actually, if I recall correctly, I think it was humorism, then the miasma theory came along, and then in the 1860s, the germ theory was proposed.
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to make a joke.
Yeah.
I don't remember the date of when germ theory was proposed, but I do know the circumstances in which it was confirmed, because they tested a member of the aristocracy. They essentially found a link between a member of the aristocracy who came down with an illness and found that they had been drinking water from a well that was in an area where the rate of falling sick to that illness was very high. And so they concluded that, well, it can't be miasma because they're not living in a state of miasma. It must be something in the water, which gives credence to germ theory.
Yeah, I don't think you can pin a date on it, because I mean, you can start from when Antonin von Leeuwenhoek made the first microscope and said, hey, there's tiny little creatures living in there, and then it just kind of developed from there as people increased their understanding.
There's no doubt in my mind that probably some ancient Roman or Greek surgeon probably theorized, maybe these illnesses aren't caused by evil spirits, but maybe they're caused by organisms that are so small we can't see them and they somehow get into us. But because they didn't have microscopes back in those days, there wasn't really any way they could prove it.
The T virus, is that the one from Outbreak or
Resident Evil?
Resident Evil. That's
the virus that turns people into zombies. And no, because here's the thing. The Resident Evil, basically, it says that the virus reanimates your cells, but if I recall correctly, viruses don't work that way.
That's not how viruses work. No.
Yeah, viruses destroy your cells, not regenerate them.
Well, and
a virus requires a healthy cell in order to do its things, reproduce. It can't affect dead tissue.
That's the point. Zombies are decaying. Even if you did have a virus that reanimated dead tissue, it wouldn't continue to decay.
Yeah. And actually, Shane, a lot of people, one guy actually pointed this out, in a lot of zombie movies, we see, the zombies that are completely decaying and all that, they're able to rip open the throats out of people. In real life, they actually pointed out if they were actually decaying that badly, they wouldn't even be able to break your skin because their jaw muscles would be so decayed, they'd be unable to do it.
That's why I miss good old fashioned voodoo zombies.
Yeah. Or vampires,
Well,
That's
I
the
mean,
funny.
they think like one of the origins of the zombie myth might be because I mean they didn't really understand how to tell when someone was really dead, and if someone got a virus or something like that, then they might be considered dead when they weren't, and then the person would start to get up and walk around, but of course not feel very well. So that might have kind of led over time as stories are told and retold and retold
Kind
into,
of,
into
kind of,
zombies.
kind of reminds me of this funny thing I saw. I don't remember where I saw it, but it was like this funny, parody of a movie. And earlier in the movie, a guy, is seriously injured, and he gives like a big epic speech and all that. Then he goes, "Oh," and then he's like, "Master, oh no, he's dead." And then like 30 minutes later, he sees him again. It's like, "Master, you're alive, but how?" And he's like, "Was it some miracle?" He's like, "No, you idiot! Just because I closed my eyes and gasped didn't mean I died." Yeah. But yeah, there actually was a case that happened, I think it was in Mexico, where a woman actually she wasn't dead, she was just in a coma from her illness, and during her wake she actually woke up, and unfortunately she was so shocked by it that she had a heart attack, and that did her in because she was weakened from the coma.
I mean, it used to be that. I mean, this is like hundreds or even thousands of years ago. There were traditions in many different cultures that you didn't pronounce someone dead for like 3 days, just to prevent that from happening. You kind of left them alone to see if they came out of it.
Also, isn't that where the term graveyard shift comes from?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of coffins had like these bells on them, and and if they were freshly buried, they would keep it there for a couple days, and it was the graveyard shift's guy to make sure that if someone, was ringing the bell, they find the grave and dig them out and hopefully try to save them. And the thing is, they have excavated graves and coffins that have found post burial scratch marks on them, implying that whoever was buried down there, they woke up and they sadly had to die a scary slow death from suffocation.
The only accounts I've seen from that say that they've been debunked. They were just kind of rumored or whatever. I mean, if you are buried under 6 feet of dirt, you're not lasting 5 minutes. That dirt is going to collapse right in on your coffin, especially if it's one of those old style wooden coffins. But I mean, even a modern steel coffin is going to cave under that much dirt.
Yeah. Not to mention, if I recall correctly, they often had procedures. People fail to realize another reason why they do the preparatory, thing for burial isn't just because they want to preserve it long enough for the funeral, but I've also heard it was done as a procedure to double check just to make sure the person is still alive, because the idea was that, well, if they're still alive, if we poke them with a really big needle, they're going to wake up screaming in pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that isn't always the case if they're, comatose or whatever. So I mean,
don't know if
a lot of cultures just said wait 3 days.
Yeah. I don't know if it's true or not, but I did read somewhere that there was actually one documented case of a person waking up in the middle of being embalmed.
I hadn't heard about that one.
Yeah. It only happened once, but that would be really scary because those chemicals they use, yeah, you do not want to get them in your system.
Well, I mean, now we pretty much understand when someone is dead, so it's not really likely to happen.
This happened like I think it happened in like the 1800s or something, back when they could embalm you and they were using chemicals, but they still generally didn't have an idea of what to do. So
I was about to say, how old is that? Because embalming seems like it was fairly new.
well, the idea of embalming goes all the way back to the ancient Egyptians, but the way they do it now is a relatively new development. Whereas before, like what the Egyptians did, they would basically bury your body in like a vat of, dust and various other chemicals until you dry it out. Whereas today, the process of cutting out your organs and pumping, I forgot what it's called, the embalming fluid into you, that's a relatively new thing. And even then, it was
just don't mess up and use Worcestershire sauce instead of embalming fluid. That would be bad.
Is that a reference to something?
South Park. Way back, I think, like in the first season.
Kenny dies after the Soviet Mir station crashes on him, and while they're embalming him, they accidentally inject him with Worcestershire sauce, and it turns him into the living dead. And finally, after they kill a bunch of zombies, the company says, "Oh, okay, it's that simple. All you got to do to let the Worcester curses kill the original zombie that caused all this. So whatever you do, do not start chainsawing people at random, because once
which
the curse
they already
is lifted,
were, yeah.
Yeah, because once the curse is lifted, they're gonna return to normal, but still chopped apart."
Well, and at first everyone just thought it was pink eye. It's like, it's pretty obvious this.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Yeah, it's like, "Doctor, something's wrong with me. I don't feel so good." "Yeah, I know. It is strange. You look very dark and clammy. You have no body temperature. Your brain activity is at bare minimal. You have no pulse." "Yeah, and this is weird, Doctor. I'm so hungry, and all I can think about is eating human flesh." "Oh, yeah. You got a really bad case of pink eye. You should go home, lie down, and I'll prescribe an antibiotic."
Oh God, I remember how unpleasant those cravings were when I had pink eye.
Yeah, but it was like he was trying to figure it out, and he went on the phone to the Worcestershire sauce company, and it was like, press 1 for sales, press 2 for customer service, and he was going through it for support with the press 5, and he presses 5, and it's like, if you're having trouble with recipes, press 1. If you have trouble with something, press 2. If our product has accidentally been used as an embalming fluid, press 3.
Well, considering what Worcester sauce is made of, it wouldn't surprise me.
I actually have no idea what it's made of.
Yeah, I actually saw a joke about that one time, where it's like the secret is Worcester sauce. It's like, "Oh, really? What is that? What's that made of?" And the guy's like, "If I told you what it's made of, you'd never want to eat it again."
It's basically it's sort of like alcohol, I think, except the alcohol's basically evaporated away, but it's like wood alcohol or something.
Basically, it's all this stuff that's been allowed to ferment, and that's it.
Oh, like
By the
cheese.
way,
it's good though. It's really good. I want some now.
Speaking of which, though, I was watching an interview with Hugh Jackman, and he says, "Look, the reason why Vegemite has a reputation of being disgusting is because people are not eating it right. You don't just take a giant spoonful, stick it in there, and eat it. You don't do that." And he showed the real way you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to take toast, get it light, and put actually a layer of butter, then put a small smidge of Vegemite on it.
Yeah.
Marmite is terrible, though.
And according to Hugh Jackman and Pipsqueak, it's actually good when you do it that way.
Never tried it.
But Pipsqueak has no taste.
Excuse me?
There he is.
There we go.
That got him back to the microphone.
Well, Australians can eat anything because they have to, because they live in a land where every single living creature wants to kill them. Yeah.
It's fine. Just eat them first.
The snakes want to kill you. The spiders want to kill you. The jellyfish want to kill you. Even the snails want to kill you. Heck, even the birds want to kill you.
I know.
I have not actually had most of those. I have had emu though.
I know what sounds like a very appealing beverage you could drink.
Yeah.
It would be koala tea.
Koala tea? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. Real funny.
Emus are so tough that I saw a parody of this one. There was like this Australian zombie movie I saw, and there was like a mock, newspaper interview where it says, "Warning: zombie virus outbreak in Australia thwarted by emus."
What you do
Yeah.
is you give the koala marijuana first, and then it's high quality.
Yeah. Yeah, see, yeah, I can imagine that. That's why Australia will never be invaded, even though they don't have a Second Amendment, because they don't need guns. The emus will take care of the invaders.
Yeah, but don't tell their
Like
government that.
during most of World War II, the defense plan, if ever Australia was invaded, was just retreat south, destroy all logistical routes, and let the desert do the rest.
Yeah,
That was the actual plan. It's like,
yeah.
because at that time, Darwin was not the city it was now. It was basically this small settlement, which is why like, you know, you hear the Japanese bombed Darwin quite frequently, but the death and injury rates are so low for how much it was bombed. It's like, yeah, because barely anyone lived there. So the entire defense plan was like, right, we'll just let the environment take care of them.
Yeah,
I can imagine. Nightmare without actual proper infrastructure.
I can imagine that. Yeah, in an alternate history, the Japanese invade, and then they have to retreat, and the general's like, "What? Why did you retreat? Did the Australians get you?" No, sir. What? Emus? They came everywhere. There was nothing we could do. They wiped us out.
Emus will get you.
That, and if they tried to go down the eastern coast, we'd probably deliberately light bushfire.
Yeah.
Who needs heavy artillery when you turn the entire country turns into a giant tinderbox for half?
I was about to say, don't the trees try to kill you over there?
Yeah, even the trees try and kill you.
Yeah. Well, there actually is a tree. It's not in Australia, but I think it's in Florida. I think it's called the manchineal, and it can seriously hurt you if you just stand under it on a rainy day. Because everything from the bark to the apples to the sap is toxic.
Gum trees do that, but on a hot day because they have a tendency to drop branches when they don't get enough water.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time there's a storm here, there's always tree branches everywhere. That's what you got to really worry about in these parts.
Yeah, speaking of tree branches, I actually got into a discussion about Hurricane Katrina for some reason because of the Simon Whistler episode I saw, which was government failures that backfired. And everyone says the reason why FEMA failed in Hurricane Katrina was because they didn't have enough funding and power. And I'm like, no, the reason why Katrina was so devastating wasn't because it was a nasty hurricane. It's because people weren't allowed to rebuild for several years after it.
Yep.
Well, yeah, this is Simon Whistler we're talking about here. He's not exactly known for scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's pretty funny.
That just reminds me of people complaining about Trump not sending enough aid to Puerto Rico, and then it turns out that some politician had put all, like, 90% of the aid in a warehouse somewhere, and they've only just discovered it. It's like, yeah, we sent it. You didn't take it.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of his recent video he had, which was about, the alleged, corporate fascist, plot to overthrow FDR and all that. And I kept bringing up the point saying, first of all, the group that opposed him were not fascist, and two, FDR and Hubert made the Depression even worse than it should have been. And they're like, oh, you need to learn real history. And I'm like, bitch, I did read real world history. The first thing you got to do to learn real history, you got to ignore everything your high school history book told you, because 90% of the stuff in that is wrong.
Yeah, pretty much.
I actually had a decent U.S. history teacher in high school who cut through most of the crap.
And that's another thing too. They always say that the stock market crash of 1929 had happened because of free markets and over speculation, but they never ask the important question. Yeah, but why did that over speculation occur? Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't the free market. It was from the inflation that the government did in the 20s, to help bail out the UK from its war debts.
Actually, this was this actually came up in high school for me too, because I asked my U.S. history teacher, okay, since I had always heard only like the positive propaganda about FDR by that point, I asked her, okay, why, since we're in a recession right now, why don't we just do what FDR did to fix things? And she's like, well, some people say that might have been what caused it.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably the worst years of the Great Depression were in 1933 through 1936, and that was the year when the New Deal took full effect.
It was actually starting to recover a little bit before that.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, one person still insisted, no, the Great Depression was caused by Herbert Hoover's laissez-faire policies. First of all, it can't be a policy if it's laissez-faire, because laissez-faire means no policy, it means hands off. And second of all, and I didn't ask him this because it would have been a waste of my time, if Herbert Hoover was a hands-off free market capitalist guy, then why the hell did FDR run when he was running against him, say Hoover's turning us to socialist? Yeah, people fail to realize the New Deal, that was actually Hoover's idea, not
Yeah.
FDR's.
He actually first championed the New Deal at the 21 recession when he was, I think it was Harding's Secretary of State or something like that. But yeah, that's when he came up with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it took them so long to do anything that the recession was over, and so yeah, definitely.
And by the way, people are saying, "Oh no, it was a corporate, capital fascist, takeover." It's like, that's what what was the guy's name? Smedley Butler, the guy who wrote War is a Racket. Yeah. Yeah, that's just what he said. And here's the thing, people. Smedley Butler was a dedicated socialist and had a hard on for FDR. So yeah, naturally he would have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing people forget
War is
about.
a Racket
People,
is definitely a must read, though. It's a really good book.
yeah. Well, I've read it. It's good. The only problem is Smedley Butler, says, yeah, war is all this. The government is sending all these problems away, and the solution is we need a bigger, stronger government that bans capitalism. That'll make war go away.
I don't think he actually said that in War is a Racket.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, he thinks that the problem with war is that it's profitable, and I'm like, no, war is not profitable. It's never profitable. Governments don't go to war because it's profitable. They go to war because they either want something that another country has and they don't want to negotiate it, or they're having an argument with another country and they can't settle it.
Well, what he explains in the book is the profits are reaped by the government and the companies that are in bed with them, as they often are, and the costs are not. I mean, yes, there are costs in dollars, but the main costs are in lives and minds, and the people who are paying the costs are not the ones who are reaping the benefits. Because politicians and these corporate, they don't send their own kids off to fight in the war.
Well, again, the problem with Smedley is, he's got a legitimate problem, but like a lot of statists, he comes to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says it's capitalism that's causing war. No.
Well, I mean, what he was describing wasn't capitalism. It's your old-fashioned mercantilism.
Yeah, but he thought it was capitalism. He was one of those socialists. It's like, oh no, mercantilism is a form of capitalism.
When mercantilism predates capitalism by like centuries.
Yeah, it's just. And the thing is, I'm sorry, Smedley Butler, but there are plenty of wars that were waged, that were not done, with profit in mind. I mean, look at the wars the Soviet Union did.
Well, no, that's what they were doing. They were trying to pay for stuff, and they were trying to expand their army and their influence and stuff like that.
Mm.
Yeah, they didn't call it the military-industrial complex in Butler's day, but there's a lot of stuff about World War II that he predicts spot on in that book.
Yeah, I will say this though. One thing that, I don't want to pull a Godwin's law, but a lot of people, always talk about the Soviet Union and how it was doing a lot of good stuff, and we only stopped saying that until we realized it was failing. You want to know something interesting? That's actually very similar to what a lot of people were saying about Nazi Germany. Like, if you actually read some of the pre-war, stuff, like when the Nazis took power but weren't launching a war yet, a lot of people were actually praising the Nazis and considering Hitler an actual revolutionary figure in philosophy. A lot of and no, this isn't coming, from right-wing corporations. It was coming from a lot of, socialists. They were saying, oh yeah, Germany is the future of socialism. And it wasn't until we actually went there and found out that not only were the Germans massacring millions of innocent people, but their economy was driven to the ground, that we started saying, oh no, Hitler wasn't a socialist. He was a right-wing nationalist.
So proto Venezuela.
Yeah. And yeah, JC Armitage, you're right. That's the biggest problem with Smedley Butler is that because he's a socialist, he assumes, well, if it involves money, then it must be capitalism.
Well, there was like that Star Trek episode with the space Nazis, and I mean the episode itself had a pretty good moral because the idea was a guy with the best of intentions had set up this system based on the Nazis, but basically as soon as it happened, someone overthrew him and took it over and ran it as corrupt as the Nazis were. But the bad thing about that was when he was saying why he was doing it is because he was talking about how efficient the Nazis were. But they weren't. They weren't efficient at all.
Yeah.
Trains run on time, my ass.
Yeah.
Well, some of the trains did, but they were the trains that people didn't want to be on.
That was Mussolini's calling card. That wasn't Hitler's. It was Mussolini that was saying fascism makes the trains run on time. And that's another thing too. People consider fascism a right-wing ideology, yet the founders of fascism themselves didn't consider that. I actually think Mussolini was interviewed and asked, which side, of the political compass that does fascism fall under, and he says it's neither. It's in the big center.
A Volkswagen. Yep, Volkswagen was started by the Nazis.
Yep.
The one they kept saying in America, Pikachu, was a chicken in every pot.
Yeah.
And JC, FDR said the same about Mussolini. FDR was talking about, yeah, this Mussolini guy has this great thing called fascism. That sounds wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, people failed to realize back in those days, we like to look and say, "Oh, why did people fall for such ignorant fascism?" It's like, your hindsight bias is showing. We know fascism is a bad idea and all that, but back in those days, look, in the night, post World War I, Europe was in a lot of pain. They tried, monarchies, which ended in disaster. A lot of places tried democratic socialism, which ended in disaster. So when National Socialism and fascism came along, people were like, well, you know what? It can't be any worse than what we have now.
Yep.
Yeah, people weren't, that's the thing that people need to realize. They need to understand Europe wasn't this, happy, beautiful land where people were singing songs under a rainbow and picking lollipops from the field. Europe, post World War I, was, for lack of a better word, it was an economic shithole,
The absolute freedom caught my some trains joke that Chris talked over, but I'm glad people got it.
Oh, sorry.
I said some trains ran on time, but they were trains people didn't want to be on.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, Europe was a wreck after pre World War I. It was a wreck France was in debt. A lot of nations were destroyed. Germany and Austria were basically, they were European Zimbabwe's. It was bad.
And Pikachu is saying it's all about quick fixes. It still is. I mean, look what Donald Trump is going on about. Yay, the economy, after doing exactly what he campaigned against. He said, listen, all this stuff that Obama is having the Fed do, that's just short term and it's just the illusion of prosperity. Then he's done the exact same thing, and now we've got the illusion of a little bit of a growth, and he's doing exactly what Obama did.
Speaking of which, I got into a little bit of a fight, with some former coworkers from that temp job that I quit after 4 days because it was an awful job, and because we did bring up politics, and they were the ones that brought it up, and I was like, and we were talking about Trump, and I'm like, the funny irony is that I voted for him, and they were saying, well, Donald Trump did this and you voted for him, and I completely ignored the fact that I also told them, yeah, but I only voted for him out of pure cynicism, basically because at the time it was either him or Hillary Clinton, and I figured, screw it, we're gonna die no matter what. At least with Trump, I can get a laugh before I die with Trump. That was my mindset.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least looks like we have a couple of good libertarians among the batch. Jacob Hornberger and Joe Jorgensen are seeking the nomination. So hopefully we can get some actual principled libertarians back there.
Yeah,
especially like Austin Peterson.
Yeah. It's a funny thing, Shane, about that article you were reviewing about how libertarianism is a gateway drug to the extreme right, and they brought up that one guy from Florida who was like that neo Roman fascist in Florida and all that, and he ran under a libertarian platform, even though he had fascist, leanings, and everyone's like, see, that's proof of it. And it's like, yeah, did you realize that they kicked him out when he was talking about how he wanted to enforce fascism and he wanted to mandate, drinking goat's blood?
Yeah. Jonathan
Yeah.
Lachey kept us up to date on that while it was happening.
Yeah, he was kicked out of the party,
Hey.
I think his
Hey.
biggest opposition was other libertarians.
Hey, bash fascism all you want, but don't knock the goat's blood.
Yeah, it's to which I want, what I want to say when people say, oh well, an evil right-wing fascist, ran under a libertarian platform, so libertarianism is a gateway to fascism. I'll say, oh well then the Democratic Party is a gateway drug to eugenicism and National Socialism, because a lot of the ideas that the Nazi Germans had, that actually was a popular idea that a lot of progressive Democrats in the United States had at the time, and some
David Duke was a
Republicans.
Democrat.
David Duke, who was that again?
Oh, look him up. He's this big, I think he was a big KKK guy or something, but yeah. Yeah, and wasn't Lyndon LaRouche a Democrat?
It's so weird. I just realized I am not getting notifications from you, Shane. I have the bell ticked and everything.
You mean on YouTube?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting that from a lot of people. Yeah, it's frustrating. It's like I see and it doesn't make any sense that views would be going up, minutes watched would be going up, all of that would be going up, but subscribers would be going down. And in all the YouTube stats and everything, they break down. Like, are people unsubscribing when they watch a video? Are they unsubscribing from your channel? Are they unsubscribing somewhere? They've got all these different categories, but they have one that's basically other, and that's where they're all coming from. And it's like, that didn't tell me anything. I think they don't know is the thing. They were like, well, you've got less subscribers before. We're not sure why, so we'll just stick it in another.
That reminds me, Shane, did you get that video I sent in the LK server?
Which one was that?
It's this absolute trash by Innuendo Studios. The alt-right playbook.
Let's see.
Yeah.
That might have been before people were spamming it with memes.
I mean, granted, it's always been there, but seeing all this bullcrap that's been going on, I actually told this with Kit, my boyfriend. I'm like, Kit, when the heck did Franz Kafka become an instruction manual for how to set up, your operation systems? Yeah, it's like
I tell you something though, if you want to know how unoriginal Kafka was, you can go online and you can look at the transcript of the William Penn trial. That thing reads like a Monty Python sketch. It really is.
Yeah, well. Yeah, actually, a lot of people also forget to realize is that Franz Kafka didn't just write about, complicated and bureaucratic, hypocrisy. He actually, a very common theme in his books was human self-defeatism, like that one. Like that one guy, who was that artist, and he claims, that his special ability was that he can go long periods without eating, and when eventually he starves to death, he admits to his boss, okay, I lied, that's not my special talent. The real reason I didn't eat anything is because I hate the taste of all foods, so that's why I never eat.
I also linked one on net neutrality, ironically from a guy who debunked the previous guy.
No.
Still, I love that onion parody.
Is anyone on the net neutrality site actually acknowledging that all their predictions were hideously wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's been, almost 2 years?
Yeah.
Maybe not quite 2 years, but something like that. And they were like, oh, they're going to be charging us extra for Facebook, and they're going to be charging us extra for live streaming and all that. Okay, where is it? My internet's over twice as fast as it was then for the same price. Where's all this slowdown?
Yeah. And another thing they seem to be ignoring, they're always talking about big evil corporations. Yeah, and you know who's lobbying for net neutrality? Comcast.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask those people. You know, they're always like, "Oh, the only people who oppose these regulations are those big evil greedy corporations." Then why are they lobbying for it?
Mm-hmm. That's how it
You know,
always
how
is.
come I mean, it's the same thing with those green laws. You know, contrary to what some people believe, environmental laws aren't being lobbied for by grassroots roots groups. They're being lobbied for by these big, solar and wind corporations. So I don't know what the hell these people are smoking. In all honesty, that's why in all honesty, I tell people when it talks about libertarianism, the thing that people need to realize, libertarianism is basically political atheism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I told that to one person who was a statheist, and he said, "No, no, no, you guys are flat earthers because you're denying the state." No, we're not denying the state. We're just denying that the state has these magical powers that automatically fix everything if the right people get in power.
Yep.
I mean, we're not saying that the guy pointing the gun at us doesn't exist. We're
Yeah.
saying he
And I
should.
pointed and I pointed that out to him. It's like, well, then by that logic, then you can't. Then you're ignorant because we know God exists. Because if He didn't exist, then the Roman Catholic Church wouldn't exist. It can go both ways, Stathius. Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I hate about some atheists. Is like, they're so smart when it comes to debunking religious bullshit, but the moment you bring up economics or politics, they throw everything out the window, and they're like, oh yeah, humans are evil, greedy, and selfish without a government.
Shane's been saying that for years, at least since like his early days. I
Oh
think
yeah.
Are You a Libertarian? That video is ancient.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, about that Sam Cedar video I was telling you about, one of the first things that really made me get pissed off was the guy said, "Yeah, I'm a libertarian ANCAP," and this one lady off camera was like, "Okay, first of all, you're not a libertarian. Libertarianism has nothing to do with anarchism. It has to do with left-wing socialism and all that." And I'm like, "Bitch, you need to learn your
Mm-hmm.
history because libertarianism is not a left-wing ideology. In fact, it was never a left or right-wing ideology. It was an individualist philosophy."
Yeah. And JC
Really?
Armitage reminds us that Facebook and Google also lobbied for net neutrality.
Yep.
Wasn't it historically a response to necessitarianism?
Yeah, sort of. When it was first proposed, from what I read, it was a counter argument for necessitarianism and absolutism, and it was argument for self-individualism. Then during the French Revolution, it became sort of an economic, philosophy, because there were a small, obscure handful of French philosophers, that wanted, kind of sort of what the United States was, which is individual Frenchmen to do their own individual thing as long as they're not hurting others. Then it became more and more involved in politics when it came to states' rights, and then it wasn't until the 1940s when a French communist came over and said, "Oh no, libertarianism is a left-wing ideology."
Yeah, the individualist version that you were talking about, they actually grew after the French Revolution under Robespierre as pushback to what he was doing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
there's a
just
strong individualist movement in France after that.
Yeah, I actually saw a
really
joke.
that just proves how great it is. Everyone wants to be associated with it.
That's another funny thing I saw one time in a comic one time where a girl who loves literature is reading about the French Revolution. It's like, it's so romantic how the people rose up to overthrow a violent and corrupt monarch, and her friends like, "Yeah, but didn't the French Revolution lead to the rise of Robespierre, the reign of terror, and later Napoleon?"
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow, Napoleon twice? That's got to be difficult.
Yeah, people fail to realize there were two Napoleons. Yep. Yep, the famous Napoleon Bonaparte and his nephew Napoleon III.
Yeah. And absolute freedom also reminds us that Jeff Bezos lobbied for the $15 minimum wage.
Yeah, which is sad because originally he was pro free markets, but then when the government forced him to comply with minimum wage, and he realized, but my competitors don't have to pay minimum wage. Well, fine, if I have to pay minimum wage, then so do my competitors. Yeah. to be honest, I hated that South Park episode where they portrayed Jeff Bezos as that, telepathic alien from Star Trek. I can't remember what it was called because it's like,
The Telosians.
yeah, I think the problem was that while it is true that they were, kind of criticizing it, at the same time they weren't dismissing, the Marxists properly because they portrayed the Marxists as having, legitimate concerns, which no, it should have been no, I think the way that episode should have been run is it should have been they should have been pointing out to the Marxists saying, yeah, but Marxism doesn't work any more than what he's doing.
Well, I think they ultimately did that, didn't they?
No, they didn't.
I'm trying to remember how that episode ended, but yeah, you had the guy in the box who just started saying all these crazy things.
Yeah,
Also-
these Marxists.
Also, I heard they canceled Mr. Hanky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
because
pissed
he
off
kept tweeting while he was taking Ambien and.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the episode was making fun of, the excuse, but still, at the end of the day, it's like, look, we're too sensitive, And actually, it's pretty funny, Shane, because I was watching that clip, where the people were like, sometimes PC babies cry and they don't know what they're crying about, and Mr. Hanky's like, well, then tell those PC babies to shut up. And there were so many comments saying, you know what? While I do agree that's not how you should address it, I do wish we had that morality because I am so sick and tired of being in public places and there's a little kid screaming his head off. He's got colic in a soiled diaper, and what are the parents doing? Nothing. It's like, look, I'm not saying you should scream at the baby, but if your kid is crying and you don't know why, take him outside until he calms down.
Or take him to the changing station or something.
Yeah. See what he wants. If he needs to be changed, change his diaper. If he needs to be fed, get a bottle out. If he's just having a colic attack and he's just crying for no reason, take him outside until he's soothed up. Don't keep him in there and just say, oh, well, he just cries and you don't know why. It's like, I don't care. I'm in the restaurant, to enjoy my pancakes and my coffee, not here, not see this little kid crying his eyes out,
I
Have you
never
ever sat
really had
next-
that problem. My kids were really good about that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and I do watch a little bit, of, those Super Nanny shows and all that. And one thing I do agree with, a lot of those parentals as they say, your kid's throwing a tantrum and crying, in a public place is embarrassing, but what's even more embarrassing? Not doing anything. Because what it makes you look like to other people? It makes you look like, wow, they have no idea what they're doing, And another thing I actually saw interesting, from a parental fix, TV show I saw is that one of the reasons why some kids often throw tantrums is because little do the parents realize they often bring it on themselves. Like I think we had a conversation about this. One thing that often happens, and a lot of people say, well, one of the biggest problems I have is my kids don't want to get dressed to go to school. It's like, well, do they? Then they do a thing and it shows the kid does want to get dressed, but the parent's like, no, you can't wear that. You're going to wear this. And that's fine. And the kid's like, no, I want to wear my favorite shirt. No, you're going to wear this sweater and some pants. It's
Yeah.
why? Why
Well,
make that a decision?
What I always did was like, all right, yeah, you want to wear shorts when it's 30 degrees? All right, if you're cold, it's your fault. And then you'll
Yeah.
learn.
Yeah. Pain is the best teacher.
And
and if
like
the
my
kid's not gonna get
kids-
serious-
As long as you're not administering it yourself.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
let's
it's like
not-
my kids, because they talk about, oh, my kid, I can't get them to eat anything. My kids were like only wanting like pizza and chicken nuggets for a while, and I was finally like, okay, wait a minute. Every night, I'm gonna cook a dinner. You can have whatever I cook.
Yeah.
You can scrounge
mentioned that,
around
yeah.
and find something else, or you can go to bed hungry. My daughter called my bluff on it once, found out that it wasn't a bluff, went to bed hungry. She told me later she was just sitting in her bedroom going, no, he's going to crack, he's going to feed me, and I never did. And she ate
I
what
think
I
you
made
told-
after that.
I think you told me that you mentioned something like that in a previous live stream, that when it was dinner time in your household, they had three choices. You either eat what I make you go to bed hungry, or you figure out how to cook your precious chicken nuggets and pizza yourself and make it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I did my job. I have food in the house. That's my job.
I took my
There's food
kids'
available
bird
for you.
Yeah.
Third
basically
option
don't do.
is not that bad, actually.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a thing. I actually saw, this. It was a really old John Stossel special, and it was, called The Family Fix. And he did say, it may seem counterproductive, but one of the best things you can do is let kids have decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And Super Nanny gets a lot of stuff wrong, but one thing I do agree with is, a lot of people often say, "Oh, another problem I have is my kids are destructive." It's like everywhere they go, they destroy everything and all that, and then they do the hidden camera thing and they observe, and you find out the parents aren't doing anything and there's nothing for the kids to do. And I mean, yeah, they're destructive, but they're not being destructive because they're evil psychopaths. They're destructive because they're bored. They
Yeah.
want to play. They want an activity, and you're just sitting around, doing boring grown-up stuff. They're bored, so of course they're going to start climbing on the couch or spinning, the fan and the chandelier because they're bored.
Yep.
Kid wants pizza. Okay, you can make it yourself in the morning. We can make the dough and then let it rise while you're at school.
Yeah,
Free range kids. I like that
Mhm.
website.
yeah.
I remember the first time my daughter wanted to go on a walk on her own through the neighborhood, and it was like, okay, she feels she's ready, but I made her. I'd put an app on her phone so I could do the GPS. I'm like, make sure you have your phone on you, and let me track you through GPS. I mean, I let her know I was doing that. I wasn't, like, and I wasn't
Reminds me of
really a
that
helicopter parent either. But it's like that first time they do it, you're like, okay.
And actually, the thing is, Shane, the reason why a lot of kids, are being helicopter parents isn't even because they're over panicky parents. It's actually because there's been plenty of cases where if you let your kids be free range kids, you'll actually get in trouble. Like that one guy, who brought his kid to a car show, but the kid got bored and he's like, "Dad, I hate this. I hate this place. Can I go home?" And he's like, "Okay, we're only a few blocks away. You can do that." And the kid knew the way home. It wasn't very far. He could have gotten there easily within 5 minutes. But in the process, he came across a police officer, and the police officer's like, "Hey, kid, where's your mom and dad?" And he's like, "My dad's at the auto show. I didn't want to be there, so I came alone." And what did the cop do? He went to the auto show and arrested the dad.
Yeah. And people are all like, well, that's because it's not like in the 50s, kids are in, so much more danger today. Kids are safer now than they were in the
Yeah.
50s or at any point in the history. Kids have never been safer.
Yeah,
Actually, one of the guys I linked, the net neutrality guy, actually has a pretty good video on this. Basically explaining how, like, since we're not really focused so much on, mortality and making sure our kids survive long enough to carry on the legacy, we end up becoming helicopter parents
yeah.
because we've gone from, I think, K selection to R selection. Was it one of the two?
I think those two have been pretty much debunked by the scientific community.
Oh.
It's not that there's no truth in them, but it's a lot more nuanced than that, and they've kind of incorporated K and R selection into all this other stuff. But it's not. There's not really a K selection or an R selection. There are aspects of both and other stuff going on.
Cinema asks, from first principles perspective, how should we view kids? Property of parents, same rights as parents.
Yeah,
Didn't
we've
you explain
discussed
this,
this. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Shane could probably explain it better, but I think what we view it as is, is that kids aren't the property of their parents. Rather, they're like what's that term where
Well,
like
parents are trustees of the kids. Is
oh
the way
yeah,
I
the
say
trustee.
It.
Yeah, basically they're signing a contract saying that basically they're sort of signing the contract when they had the kid, not that they're going to have the kid, but they're going to take care of the kid until they're old and reasonable enough, to take care of themselves, and if they break that trustee fund, then there can be intervention, because that's active aggression.
Yeah, I mean, if you do not fulfill your role as trustee, then someone else will be justified in taking the child and fulfilling that role.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I've actually read about, and I've actually heard this about teenagers. And one of the biggest things about I've actually heard from one guy who's an actual child psychologist. He says the reason why one of the biggest misconceptions with teenagers is that is that, oh, they're being troublemakers because they're being pumped full of hormones and they're challenging us for dominance. And while that is true to an exception, he says the real reason why is because I see with a lot of parents is that you want them to have the responsibilities of quote unquote a grown up, but you don't want them to have any of the privileges. And he says that's a very contradictory way to be raising them. If they can prove to be responsible, you should let them, go to their friends, Friday night party and whatnot. You should let them do that. Just remember, saying, look, I have a lot of faith and responsibility in you, so I'll let you do it. But if you betray that, then I'm going to take it away. Don't say, you have these extra responsibilities. Oh, well, can I go to Sam and James's Friday night party? No, you can't. It's way past your bedtime. That's not a good way. That's contradictory.
Yeah.
It's like, why? I'm not going to get anything out of it. That's the reason why kids are like that. It's not because they're naturally rebelling against you. It's just because they're developing a sense of, well, what's in it for me? What I mean? It's easier when they're little kids because little kids want to appease their parents, so that's their reward is playtime with mommy and daddy. But as they get older, they want things like cash or that new game system or electronic. At that point, you shouldn't be teaching them, you will do what I say when I say. You should be teaching them, if you want something, you got to work for it.
Yeah, JC,
You know what I
things
mean?
like that, I don't think there's like one answer you can give for every child. Daycares have a lot of advantages, because they can help, kids learn to socialize early and have, have other people their own age that they can be around. And if you're not in a neighborhood where, they have that and they can go to a playground or whatever, then
Yeah.
daycare
But
might be
contrary,
good.
but contrary to what the school status say, homeschooled kids do not have low social skills. In fact, I actually read there was actually a study that actually showed they had far superior social skills than the ones that went to public school.
Well, because it's not the case that the homeschoolers are just making them read from books at home or something and not doing anything else. They're out there looking for things that the kids can do, sports that they can play with, or other kids that they can do
Yeah.
activities with.
Yeah, and here's another, and that's why I hated the South Park episode hooked on monkey phonics because the moral of the story is the homeschool kids are idiots because they were never properly socialized yet, and Matt Stone said in the commentary kids need to be beaten up and learn that, but in that very same episode the dad of the homeschool kids confronts them because their kids, because the kids of South Park beat up the homeschool kids, and he was confronting them saying, hey, your son beat up my kid. And the parents' response was, what, are you criticizing how I raised my kids? I'm going to kick your ass. And I'm just saying, yeah, that's the reason why the kids are violent. It's not because they're on the playground. It's because they witnessed their parents saying, hey, you don't agree with me. I'm going to kick your ass. And that's what they inherit. That's where kids get most of their social skills from. It's from you. It's not just from playing with other children. It's from you.
Well, and that's like in A Christmas Story when Ralphie says the F word and the mother is demanding to know where he heard that. And he had heard it from his father all the time, but he chickened out and said it was from a friend of his.
Yeah, Yeah, that's actually another thing that I will say I do agree with Super Nanny on, and she does say this. Whatever you do when you're raising a kid, never, ever, ever make them do something that you wouldn't do themselves. So if there's like a particular vegetable that you want them to eat, you want them to eat their vegetables, don't force them to eat a vegetable that you yourself hate because they're gonna be like, wait a minute, how come I gotta eat steamed cauliflower when mommy and daddy don't because they hate it?
Actually, Zero, teenage drug use and underage sex are both down, so that's another misconception
Yeah.
that people have about today.
And
Yeah.
the reason why is because we're a little bit more open about it,
Well, I mean, you hear about it more because, like, in the 50s, it was this big scandal and everyone hushed it up.
Yeah,
But my mom's mother was 16 when she had my mom. Teen pregnancies happened. And that was in the 30s,
Well, to be fair, back in those days, it actually wasn't, it wasn't considered too scandalous, for women that young to have children, especially if they were getting married, if it was a prearranged marriage, although
Well,
I don't know what
it
her
was kind of, my understanding is it was kind of a shotgun wedding. Her brothers made sure that,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, basically. Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it happened. A lot of the things
yeah,
that you think, that's one of the things I liked about Back to the Future, the first one. You know, the Marty's mom was always like, "Oh, when we were your age, we didn't go out and park, and we were always good, and we didn't do any of the things we did." And then he goes back in time to 1955, and yes, they did.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's just that's just that's another thing too. That's another thing too that I really hate, and I'm not a child psychologist a lot, but another thing too when I reflect is like that is when parents say they don't want their kids to do something, and when the kid asks, well, "Why can't I do it?" They say, "Because I said so." No, do not say that. Never say because
Yeah.
I said so.
That was one thing I vowed never to say to my kids. And
Yeah,
there
if you
were
don't,
times where I had to say, it's like, look, this is really difficult to explain, and you're just not old enough to understand it now, but I promise, when
yeah,
you're old enough, you'll understand. And I mean, they understood that because they knew I didn't BS them about things like that.
yeah,
So
yeah, I mean, if
how was it giving them the talk?
Oh.
yeah,
My daughter insists I scarred her for life because when she was 5 years old, she asked me where babies came from, and I told her. And she
Oh my
told me later, it
God.
was like, no, you were supposed to lie and say it was a stork. Like,
yeah. I've actually heard the best response. I've actually heard the best response ever where where a woman said, when she was growing up, she asked her dad, "Dad, where do babies come from?" And he's like, "Honey, do you really want to know?" It's like, "Yeah, why?" "Listen, honey, if I tell you right now when you're not able to mentally process it, you're not going to be a happy girl."
well, I mean, I didn't get explicit about it or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't get into the mechanics of things or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, you didn't say. Yeah, you didn't say. Well, the thing is, honey, you weren't exactly planning. I was about to pull out, but then your mom got adventurous and stuck her finger up my butt, and then I came too soon. And she's like, Shay, did you just come in me? It's like, oh, honey, you stuck a finger up there.
For the
I was
record,
expecting it."
that is not how it happened. Just so
I know.
everyone knows that.
And
I'm just making a South Park joke
if
where
Yeah.
the video was not demonetized before, it is
It
now.
is definitely demonetized now. Yeah, thanks,
It was-
Chris. I'm
was-
gonna have to make you guys pay me every time you demonetize one of these.
who cares? You mentioned you make more money off of Patreon anyway, and I'm already
Oh.
paying you. I'm paying you $5 a month.
Yes, you
on
are.
Patreon.
Yes, you are, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, yeah. That's how much of a dedicated fan I am. I'm.
Yeah, but I mean,
I'm trying
this is just the way it's gotten, and it's not because I've gotten more. Although I have gotten more patrons, but I mean, it hasn't like skyrocketed or anything. It's just because the regular monetization has gone down so much. Last month, I made twice as much on Patreon than I did from YouTube monetization. That's not counting Subscribestar, where I have some other the supporters as well.
Let's be real here, Shane. Your video was probably going to get demonetized no matter what because of your history and reputation. Remember, YouTube. Remember, this is a platform that demonetized white noise videos simply because of the title.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like that one video I saw, where it says, is left, are SJWs actually Nazis? And all the guy did was talk gibberish and talk about random stuff and stuff he likes to do over the weekend and all that. And it got demonetized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
mean, it's weird. It doesn't make any sense. Some of the ones that get manually confirmed for limited monetization, and it's like, for what? And I'm pretty sure I know what's going on because the way the copyright works, and they'll actually show you this, is like from 8 minutes and 14 seconds to 8 minutes and 56 seconds, you have, this piece of video. And so they're breaking it down into chunks and looks at, and I'm sure that there are chunks of the video that is looking at and saying, oh, that's something suspicious. And when they do the manual confirmation, I'm fairly convinced that the people who confirm it do not watch the entire video. They just watch that little segment of it, possibly out of context. But then why not tell us what segment that was?
And let's not forget the turbo encabulator.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, and actually, Shane, this kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier. That's another problem with the whole, COPA thing. It's all that, everyone's like, oh, but if we don't pass government regulations, what's going to protect our children from dirty websites? And I'm like, isn't that your job?
I did
Yeah.
not. I did not
Who will
appreciate
protect our
it.
kids from these explicit websites? You! That's your job!
I did
Yeah.
not appreciate this think of the children crap when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
it's like, yeah, that's another thing too, is when you really think about it, when people say, oh, won't someone think about the children? I'm like, well, are you a parent? Yeah, I'm a parent of a couple little kids. Well, that's your job.
I was basically.
About the children, easy. You're basically saying, oh no, I want to be able to still go out and party, so the government needs to watch my kids for me.
And I think a lot of us can kind of confirm this, but I remember basically being like the child equivalent of not your shield in my day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, I think I saw this one comedian one time. He was like this Latino guy, and he was telling a story growing up about all the sensitivity. And he's like, and he says, that's the thing with modern day parents. They're lazy. They don't know what they're doing. You see, growing up, he was like, growing up, I grew up in a terrible neighborhood, really terrible neighborhood. It was a project, and my mom and dad, they both worked double jobs, just so we could have something to eat on the table at the end of the week. And guess what? They still made sure to put in some time for me. They still spent time with me when they had the ability to. We've got these parents, nowadays that are like, oh, I only want to be a part-time parent. It's like, no, it's a full-time job. Nothing you can do about it.
Yep.
Yeah, until those kids move out of the house, it's a 24/7 job. There's nothing you can do about that.
Rainbow Asteroids, what my experience is, if it hasn't been demonetized, it's like $3 for 1,000 views or something in that region, and it can vary, but that seems to be about it. When it's on limited monetization, it's more like 50 cents. It can make that much of a difference. And see, this doesn't make any sense to me, because think about it from the point of view of an advertiser. Because they say, okay, well, limited monetizations, there aren't a lot of advertisers who want to advertise on. Okay, put yourself in the place of one of those advertisers.
It does not make sense.
Hold on. You've got a video that is perfectly fine that everyone else wants to advertise on. And then you've got a video that you don't mind advertising on, but fewer other people's doing. Isn't that second video worth a lot more to you? Isn't it worth to say, hey, let's run our ads more on these videos? Why should there be fewer ads all total? Fewer advertisers, yes, but the advertisers that are left on there are going to get more bang for their buck. So, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. If you're an advertiser, you would want your ads to be on a limited monetization video. This cannot be the advertisers doing this. It just cannot. It does not make sense.
It does not make sense, ladies and gentlemen of this alleged jury.
It does not make sense that Chewbacca lives on Endor when Chewbacca didn't live on Endor, but we won't.
Speaking of
which, I was watching a legal video.
Oh, Shane, do you really want to get me and Chris started on this?
No, I was talking about Legal, and Legal. I have mixed feelings about him, because on one hand, he does some really good videos debunking, common myths about, about what goes on in a court. Like, a perfectly good example is he was watching the movie Liar, Liar, and that scene where Jim Carrey can't lie to the police officer. Yeah, where Jim Carrey can't lie to the police officer, and he's like, well, you don't have to lie to the police officer. If you don't want to talk with the police officer, contrary to what people think, you have every right to just flat out ignore the officer. You don't have to respond to anything.
Yeah, but the thing is, in the movie, it wasn't just that he couldn't lie. He was compelled to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So that...
One thing I don't like about Legal, though, and he said this in the same one, is that he's against tort reform. He's like, oh, those frivolous lawsuits you hear about, they're scams. No, they exist.
Yeah, well,
And then
and he is definitely on the left. He has that bias, so keep that in
Yeah.
mind when you watch it. But it's a good channel. I like it.
Yeah.
I recall I recall Esso responding to his thing on Captain Marvel.
And speaking of videos, did you see that video I linked, a Family Guy that shows what happens when the city shuts down and it all goes to hell? Garbage doesn't get in there, and Mr. Peter Schmidt points that out. And all the comments in the video of that are like, "Oh, Peter Schmidt is polluting everything because the Quahog government shut down." Isn't the Clean Air Act a federal law?
Yep.
Yeah, so. And it's pretty funny because I'm like, Seth MacFarlane, it's because in the very rare cases where a government has legitimately been dismantled, how come the exact opposite happens? How come, contrary to what people were saying, things were improving in Somalia under that brief, 2 to 3 year period where it was a stateless society?
I think the only things that didn't improve, it was adult literacy, and there was one more.
Infant mortality, I believe.
No, I think infant mortality did improve. I think.
I think it was, what was it? Literacy.
One was adult
And
literacy.
something else.
It basically had to do with the education of the population that suffered under stateless Somalia, but all the rest of the stuff improved greatly.
Careful, they'll pull a macrocosm fallacy.
Oh, yep. Yeah, and that's the funny irony is that from 1989 to the fall of the Bahrain regime to 1992, things were actually somewhat improving in Somalia. And when did things go to shit? In 1993, when the United Nations was like, "Oh no, poor Somalia doesn't have a government. Don't worry, we'll install one for you."
Yeah, that was 2004 when they did that. It was like 13 years when it was stateless.
Oh.
The Bahrain regime fell in 91, and then you kind of had those civil wars until 93. And then 2004 was when basically, and the biggest problem was effectively the UN gave control to Ethiopia. That was the big problem.
But that's what caused Somalia to be a shithole, when it was under a stateless society. And that's why I honestly don't consider that to be a stateless, is because the United Nations came in and said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll take everything for you." And they gave them all this free stuff, and they basically destroyed the Somalian economy.
Well, and they also, Ethiopia was basically controlling Somalia's waterways. And of course, Somalia wanted to do that, and they wanted, to fish and everything. And you had Ethiopia and a couple of other countries that were just trolling the waters and overfishing everything. And the Somali pirates started out as a citizens' coast guard because they just wanted to guard their own coast and protect their own fishing waters and everything. And they became pirates over time because Ethiopia and the other countries started fighting them, and the UN declared them illegal. And so they started doing things like smuggling drugs, and then it all escalated from there.
And if I recall correctly, one of the reasons why Al-Shabaab got in power is because a lot of the African nations that were put in charge of it, they were mostly Islam under Sharia law. So they supported groups that supported their beliefs. And what happened? They formed Al-Shabaab now, and now we've got Al-Shabaab going around.
Well, and you've got all of these different groups kind of vying for control of Somalia. The problem with Somalia isn't no state, it's too many states, because you've got all of these. But really, when you have Somaliland, which is kind of like that, if Somalia is a 7, then this is that top line on the 7, that's Somaliland. That part is still, I think, pretty much an anarchy because none of the factions have any real control there, and it's the part that's doing really well.
Yeah. Oh, here's another thing, Shane. When on the subject of anarchism, I was watching a video in the back alley yesterday, and they were watching this video about the history of anarchism, and the guy said that Noam Chomsky and Mahatma Gandhi were anarchists.
No.
Yeah, I'm like, no, Noam Chomsky is not an anarchist. He's a statist. He's a statist as much as he wants to deny it. He wants a state government in charge. He wants Hugo Chavez, to be the eternal president of the world if it was possible. And as for Mahatma Gandhi, yeah, he was a pacifist, but he was still an Indian nationalist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was actually in favor of partition, which... that was not a good feather in his cap. That's what got him assassinated by a fellow Hindu.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the
yeah.
really good Doctor Who episodes from Jodie Whittaker's first season was the one they did on Partition. I think they did a really good job with that.
Yeah. Yeah, because if I recall correctly, Mahatma Gandhi, he wanted free, and Penn and Teller pointed this out in Holier Than Thou. He wanted to end discrimination and regulations, but only against discrimination that was affecting the Indians. What about the Christians and the Muslims? Screw them.
Well, and he actually did believe that, black people were, inferior, savage animals,
Oh yeah.
I mean,
That's so
that
funny.
was then, to be fair to him, that was a common belief during his, the place and time he comes from. But
Yeah. But yeah, that line from Family Guy, where it shows Gandhi, he's like, and you black people are going around saying, "Hey, bitch!" Oh, and we Indian people, we do not address our women in such a way. And the comment, there was actually a comment that says, "Oh, you think that's racist? Here's what Gandhi said about blacks in South Africa. The kafir, which by the way is a South African slang term for nigger, he said the kafir's sole ambition is to collect a certain number of cattle to buy a wife with, and then pass his life in indolence and nakedness. They are loafers, a species of humanity completely unknown amongst the Indians."
By the way, Shane, how much money does Chris owe you for dropping an N-bomb?
Yeah, that wasn't good as far as hopefully the algorithm won't pick that up. So
Yeah, who cares?
I mean, you weren't calling anyone that, so that's. But I don't think they make that distinction.
Yeah, I was just explaining what kafir meant.
Yeah.
So I was using it within context.
They don't care about context.
Yeah. I will say though, Shane, I rewatched that really old video, about questions black people have for white people, and they're always talking about, why do you want to say the N-word so badly? If that was me, I would have been like, I don't know, why do you?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You're always like, you're always talking about how saying the N-word, it's bad, it's violent and oppressive. Yet I've worked with, alongside a lot of black people and all that, and I'm sorry, they love going around saying, "Hey, what's going on? Oh, what's up, my M-word? Oh, what's going on? Oh, what's going on, my M-word?" It's like, practice what you preach, people. Practice what you preach.
Yeah, I forget which of Richard Pryor's shows it was, but one of his stand-up shows that they did a movie out of was when he was talking about, because before then he was, N-word all over the place, and so he was talking about why he stopped doing that, and I mean, it's really good.
Didn't Paul Magruder take this on in the Boondocks?
Yeah, I love the Boondocks.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. I'll still never remember the first episode. Yeah, it's like, what's wrong with you? Granddad, I had a terrible nightmare. What happened? A bunch of white people chased me for telling the truth. Boy, what did I tell you about telling white people the truth?
And yes, Gandhi became a warlord after an integer overflow. Yep. Empire Civilization. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Actually, if I recall, during his time as an Indian activist, he actually sent a letter asking for political support from Hitler.
Gandhi will nuke your ass.
He also sent a letter asking for political support from the USSR, so, context.
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
He was basically asking for support from everybody, so I don't know if you can really hold that against him.
Yeah, anyone who was anti UK. But you know what? When it comes about the Cold War, and people and communists love to say, all the atrocities that America did against communist revolutionaries. It's like, you want to know something funny? A lot of those regimes we funded, they were actually socialist in nature, which is why I tell people, contrary to popular belief, the Cold War wasn't capitalism versus communism. It was U.S. government versus Soviet government.
Yeah.
Because if I recall correctly, at the same time, the Soviets, they funded a lot of African warlords who were diehard religious nutcases and despised communism, but the Soviets funded them because they were anti-European and anti-US too. So
yeah, I like the Boondocks, the comic, and when they made it into the animated series, I really liked the first season. I don't know what happened in the second season though, but it went downhill.
Really, the fourth season, in my opinion, is where it went.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard it was good, but then it started caving to SJWs. I especially loved the episode where they bring where they bring Martin Luther King Jr. back from the dead, and he
That was
shot the
actually the one I was thinking of when I mentioned it at
oh
first.
yeah, and he shocked them, and he shocked to see that the civil rights movement has devolved into a neo black supremacy group, and he's like, this isn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, Shane, that's another thing I find so funny about historical biasm is, about I was reading about, the 1960s and the civil rights movement, and we were talking about the Black Panthers, and it seems like the book really tried to downplay the Black Panthers and the atrocities they committed. And they said, well, yeah, they did kill a few innocent cops, but they also set up orphanages and they did all this good stuff. And I'm just thinking, yeah, so did the Ku Klux Klan. People
Yeah.
fail to realize a lot of the KKK groups were founded by church groups, and they did have charitable events that go in there, and they did have groups that committed community service, like picking up trash and all that. You can't. It's
I'm trying to think back to my Cold War days, and I don't actually remember people at the time saying it was capitalism versus communism. It was, the United States, which is the greatest country, in the world, versus the evil empire.
yeah.
I don't remember it specifically being like capitalism versus,
What did Disney have to do with the Cold War?
a lot. They did a lot of stuff like with the CIA. Oh god, what was that CIA project in the 50s that was linked to McCarthyism and
I will say that's one thing I don't like about the Fallout universe and the games, even though I love the games, is the pre-war culture, because it's like the pre-war culture in the Fallout universe. It's like, dude, these policies are going to lead to a nuclear war, which is going to destroy all of humanity. And they're like, oh, but we can't let those Reds win.
was it like
Well, isn't
Project
that
was it like Project Paper something or something like that?
Paperclip.
Paperclip, yeah, that was it. And then
Yeah.
later on, they were involved in Project Mockingbird, and I mean,
Yeah.
even today, they're still they're down with the IC, man. They will.
But Chris, to be fair, isn't that a pretty realistic portrayal of the U.S. government?
Well, it actually kind of reminds me of Slaughterhouse-5, and I haven't read the book, but I heard like a summary, and like there was that guy that had that hallucination. He encountered these aliens, and they were trying to invent a device that could theoretically destroy an entire galaxy. And he's asking them, why the heck would you invent something like that? And they're like, well, because if we don't invent a way to destroy the galaxies, the enemies will invent a way to destroy the galaxy.
Yep.
Yeah. And people actually fail to realize the guy's not literally being with aliens. He's actually hallucinating, and everything that he's hearing from the aliens is actually something that a general said to him, where because he questioned a general saying, why do we have to be so mean and vicious? Why do we have to bomb innocent people, who have nothing to do with the Nazis? And he goes, oh, because if we don't, they'll bomb us back and kill everyone.
That was actually a joke that was going around, or more of a meme that was going around during the Cold War. It was like, well, why is the U.S. doing this awful thing? Well, because if they don't, the Russians will do it first. Yeah, that was a.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I saw a video, and
The Cold War proves that if governments are good at one thing, it's dick measuring.
Yeah, pretty much.
I will say this, Shane. I actually saw a video, and a guy tried to justify the Dresden bombing.
Wow.
Yeah, no joke. He was like, no joke. He was like saying, well, you see, the reason why the Dresden bombing was done is because the Allies were trying to stop the war as soon as possible. And I'm like, dude, if you actually read the historical records, the Allies flat out said, yeah, Dresden's not, a military, strategic, or logistical target, but we got to do it because we gotta terrorize the Germans. We got to show them we mean business. Yeah, right from the get-go, it was a terror bombing, and it wasn't until people failed to realize the Allies were committing an equal number of atrocities, and in fact, some of their atrocities, with the exception of the Holocaust, were even worse than what the Germans were doing.
I mean, if you're talking about war crimes, yeah.
Yeah, and
oh my god, a lot of the stuff the Russians were doing. Oh my god.
Oh yeah, people. There's a reason why the Battle of Berlin is also called the Rape of Berlin, because the Soviets kept going around killing people even after the Germans officially surrendered.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've actually heard stories of them, where there were actual cases of people going to the Russians with their hands up saying, please don't hurt us. We don't want to hurt anyone. And the Russians shot them anyway because, oh, nope, your leaders didn't surrender. So we're still at war. So you're an enemy combatant.
Yeah. Yeah, Pikachu says, do you want the Soviets to win? And now do you want the terrorists to win? I noticed that pretty much right off the bat after 9/11, it was all of the same propaganda and talking points and everything else I had grown up with. They had just replaced, Soviets with terror. They replaced like communists with terrorists and Soviets with Arabs or whatever. Yeah, it was the same stuff. Just search and replace through it.
Actually, it kind of reminds me of this funny thing I saw about the Cuban Missile Crisis because, yeah, it is true that it was in response to the U.S. having missiles in Turkey, and I understand. The thing I criticized when I was talking to these Russian nationalists is how is putting nuclear missiles close to the U.S. Going to improve the situation? And I saw this funny joke like that one time where Khrushchev is talking about how it's like I am so pissed off that I can see the Turkish nuclear missiles right across, from the lake and all that. So I demand we put nukes in Cuba. And Khrushchev's, secretary is like, yeah, but Premier Khrushchev, won't that just further increase tensions between the U.S. and actually increase the chances that they'll use those nukes on us? And Khrushchev's like, why? You're not a counter-revolutionary, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because let's be honest with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviets weren't behaving any better.
No,
You know what I
and
mean?
it was really, Kennedy, I think, deserves the credit for saying, no, I'm going to stop listening to the generals. Let's see if we can get Khrushchev on the line and just talk this out. Because I think pretty much it was Kennedy who had started that, the de-escalation.
Because if I recall correctly, the original plan was we should bomb Cuba to hell. And when people said, yeah, but if we do that, the Soviets will launch nuclear weapons, the generals were like, well, bring it on. We'll survive it.
No, we wouldn't have survived it. Well, I mean, we might have survived it, but,
Well,
yeah, what you're saying about like the same old rhetoric just kind of reminds me of, I'm not even 30 yet, so
yeah.
like I've only got a few presidents under my lifespan.
I hate, yeah, I read all about the history of World War II and the atomic bomb, and in all honesty, I hate the people that sold the bomb to the Soviets. And people are justifying. They're like, oh, but what if the United States became fascist? So the best way to fight fascism is to give the most dangerous weapon ever developed by humankind at the time to a dictator who killed more people than all three of the fascist dictators combined.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
survival is not equal victory. Yeah, I was thinking kind of a Mad Max kind of post-apocalyptic survival. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing about it is, it was really a bad thing to do anyway, because all it ultimately meant was that America could no longer do something about Cuba, and if they had never taken that step of putting the missiles in Turkey to begin with, and had all that escalation from there, JFK would never have had to make that deal not to intervene in Cuba. But since all that happened, the U.S. had no choice but to sit by and just let Cuba happen.
Yeah.
So they had actually put the U.S. in a worse situation.
Yeah, well, it's funny about
Chris, I lost my train of thought. Thanks.
No, you didn't.
You need to get your train of thought to run on time.
Yeah, nuclear weapons, And it's pretty funny because I've seen so many people try to justify the atomic bomb. It's like, yeah, but if we didn't have the atomic bomb, then we would have had to invade Japan, and that would have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And I'm like, why did we need to invade Japan? Japan was, for lack of a better, it was pretty much defeated. They had lost all their territory. They were barely holding up in China, and they literally had the US and the Russians knocking out their back door. There was no need to go. It's like, well, we had to make sure they didn't. And that's the problem. See, that's the problem. Wars can't just be all about you kick them out of the territory and then you're like, that's it. You've lost. We kicked you out. Don't come back again. No, it's got to be, oh, no, we can't just do that. We got to invade their homeland, invade their capital, burn it to the ground, and force their leader to bend over and blow us off while we sign and make them sign an absolute surrender. that doesn't breed peace. That breeds resentment and hatred.
Yep.
And I still can't believe we haven't learned that lesson from the Treaty of Versailles. Yeah, yeah, you can't bring permanent peace by making your enemies, blow you and do what you say. You need it's cooperation, not war.
That's
Yeah,
what
Shane,
that's what Mark Twain that's what Mark Twain said. History may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Shane, I want to get your confirmation on that. Because you have a lot more experience with this than I do.
What's that?
Now, I at least remember something that I would recognizably consider Obama derangement syndrome. Is this just something that happens with every president?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's gotten worse, I think, over time. Either that or I'm just getting more cynical. But yeah, I mean, every president that gets elected, the other party thinks this is the worst one ever and he's going to destroy America.
Yeah.
Yeah, every president is the savior to his supporters and the antichrist to his enemies.
Yep.
Yeah, I will say this though, Shane. One thing that's so funny and all that is when people, because you were talking about Kennedy earlier, is that people were talking about how, well, the way Kennedy handled the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's what got him assassinated because he was against the military industrial complex and they had him killed. And I'm like, well, not really, because yeah, Kennedy, was very, de escalation with Cuba, but that's because nuclear missiles were on the line and there was a legitimate fear of a global nuclear war. But when it came to smaller conflicts where nuclear weapons weren't a thing, he was all for it. I mean, here's the thing: Vietnam was Kennedy's idea.
I still insist that Kennedy was actually assassinated by a time traveling Kennedy.
Yeah, that's the Red Dwarf episode.
Yeah. I mean,
from an alternate future. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
time traveling Kennedy from an alternate future. But it's just the same thing over and over again.
Yep. Yeah, the war's meant to be one. It's meant to be continuous. Yeah, because.
And how many different ways can it be proven that Oswald killed Kennedy? I mean, every time someone comes through with, oh, we're going to use the latest forensic techniques and we're going to, do this brand new thing and, regenerate the computer models and everything. And we're going to find the truth this time. And they say, oh, looks like Oswald killed Kennedy from the book depository.
I will say this, Shane, you were talking about it because people can't comprehend how the most important person in the world, can be assassinated by one guy. I actually heard from one former Secret Service agent. He says the funny irony is that the reason why the president is so vulnerable is ironically because he's so well protected, because he has all these armed guards and an armored, limousine and an airplane. People become more relaxed because they think, oh yeah, you'd have to be stupid to try to kill the president. So as such, there's cracks in the hole because everyone assumes, well, no one's going to try. So when someone takes
effect. Yeah.
What?
The Peltzman effect.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's another perfectly good example. Ronald Reagan was surrounded by armed and armored bodyguards. And how did John Hinckley Jr. shoot him? He just walked up.
Yep. And I mean, he didn't kill him, but that was more of like a question of where the bullets actually went. But
yeah, well.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. And that's another thing too is, President William McKinley, he had armed security on them. He had that, and the guy who killed him literally just walked up to him, gave him a handshake, then pulled out a pistol and shot him a couple times in the abdomen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only, the truth is, the only guarantee way to completely reduce, the risk of the president being assassinated from anybody but, a highly specialized team is to literally put him in a bunker several feet in the ground. And he can't do that because that's not a good sign of a president. So.
Well, I mean, look at how well protected the Archduke, what was his name, Fernandez was. That started
Franz Ferdinand.
Ferdinand. Yeah, I knew it was wrong when I was saying it, but I couldn't pull up the right name.
When I hear that, I always think of the duck from Babe.
Yeah, but anyway, it was like the guy. It was like 3 or 4 different attempts, one right after the other, and it kept getting foiled because Ferdinand would like all of a sudden turn down a different street the guy wasn't expecting and things like that. And so he ended up getting through that line of security like 3 or 4 times before he finally shot him.
Well, people fail to realize the funny irony is that the assassination did not go according to plan because, like I said, there were 3 assassins besides Gavrila Princip, and from what I recall, what happened was the first assassin tried to shoot the Archduke, but his gun jammed. And by the time he unjammed it, the Archduke was out of sight. So a second guy tried to move in, but he forgot to load his pistol, and so that failed. And in a desperate attempt, they tossed a grenade.
How do you get to load a pistol in a pre-made?
But the grenade
You're attempting to assassinate someone. You'd think that'd be on your checklist.
Yeah, and the grenade that they used to try to kill him was a piece of crap because it was like an old, fuse grenade from the 1880s. So it got delayed and it bounced off, and even didn't explode properly, which is why only 2 people got somewhat injured and not actually killed. And then when that happened, the assassins were caught almost immediately, so they tried to commit suicide by taking cyanide. Their cyanide pills were expired and just made them sick. So one guy was captured instantly. One guy tried to drown himself in a river, but the river was at low tide, so it was only ankle deep. And from what I've read, Princev ran into a cafe and spent his last dollars on sandwiches and alcohol. And when he finally shot the Archduke, he was apparently drunk and contemplating suicide. Then he walked out with a sandwich and a beer. He looks up and he's like, "What the?" There was an Archduke right in front of him.
The Archduke's driver took a wrong turn and ended up right in front of the guy who was trying to kill him the entire time. But this is why I say that Archduke Franz Ferdinand is the man whom fate demanded done.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the funny thing is that, the Archduke probably wouldn't have died had he followed with the standard routine, but he wanted to visit, the police officers that were injured, by the previous assassin, and he said, I want to go over there and make sure they're okay, give them, some Austrian royal rewards and whatnot. And they're like, okay, we can do that. And like you said, Pitsqueak, the guy pulled in, but he went the wrong way. And the general who was with the Archduke says, hey, where are you going? This is the wrong way. You got to turn around. So he came to a complete stop, and they just so happened to stop in front of the cafe that Princev walked out of.
Yeah, and also look at how many bombing attacks Hitler survived, but only because either the bomb was in the wrong position or they had changed locations or something like that. But they got the bombs past all his security.
Yeah. Or the best example is they had a bomb that was more than capable of killing him, but he survived because he was standing behind a hard oak table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just mostly the luck of the draw that kept happening. And also the bombs can be pretty tricky things.
Yeah. And the funny irony, and I actually saw this one time, a Jewish guy goes back in time and he tries to kill Hitler, and he successfully does. And then when he comes in, he finds out that the Nazis, quote unquote, won the war, and even more Jews died. And when he wonders why, the guy said, well, because when Hitler died, a much more competent Nazi officer took over, and he
Himmler
ran
or
things
Goebbels
a little
or
bit
someone
better.
like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Hitler was pretty much literally insane and was sending out these crazy orders, and like normally in war...
That was very late in the war because there was one theory that Hitler accelerated essentially at the start of World War II because he found out he was going to come down with Alzheimer's.
Well, I
don't necessarily believe that because there's the whole massive oil shortage that Germany had because of the British blockade, which is why they went after Russia.
Yeah, but I mean, it was a standard thing in war that one of the things you do is, you cut off the enemy's lines of communication so they can't get orders. Well, the Allies would cut off the lines of communication with Berlin, and then they'd start fighting better because they weren't getting these crazy orders they had to follow, and the commanders on the field actually understood strategy.
That's actually why, contrary to what British and French nationalists love to think, Dunkirk wasn't the result of the brave and quick reaction of the British and Commonwealth forces. Dunkirk occurred because the Germans had a miscommunication because Hitler couldn't decide whether or not he actually wanted to invade. Hang
on. Yeah, that was partly because Hitler wanted to reach peace negotiations with Britain, and he thought one of the ways he could do that was by allowing essentially the British to escape. The other reason is that a lot of the high high command officers thought that a British counterattack was imminent, so they wanted to stop and secure the line. And there was this whole miscommunication of like the field command officers below them were looking at the reports coming in from their soldiers and going, "Yeah, no way that's happening. The British completely in the retreat." And the officers below them were listening into high command stuff like, "Oh no, we got a counterattack." And then the average enlisted soldier is like, "Yeah, no, the British are on the run. Why are we stopping?"
Yeah.
So it was this whole confusion with that thing. And then, of course, there's also Hitler's over-reliance on the Luftwaffe in the Stalingrad campaign, and also his demand that they retreat immediately after they had almost won Kursk. So he was directly responsible for those two battles turning out the way they were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
what about-
Rainbow,
and what
that's why when they talk about security, they talk about multiple layers, because someone who is skilled with securing systems would say, okay, you also give the turtle a parachute and an ejector seat and a flotation device. You don't just want just one thing to protect something. You want multiple layers of protection, protecting it in different ways.
Yeah, you gotta Murphy proof it.
Yep. Yeah, that's why it's so tricky a thing. But you can't rely on any one thing. It's like they're saying about the end-to-end encryption, and all these hackers and governments are getting around it. Well, why is that? Well, because they're able to hack into the phone itself or seize the phone itself, and the end-to-end encryption doesn't have anything to do with how it's stored. So you can get someone's WhatsApp messages from the phone if you can unlock the phone. So if you want to
seize the means of communication.
Yeah, so you would need, if you want to protect against that, then you gotta have WhatsApp somehow securely encrypt the data when it saves it to disk. But even then, however the user unlocks it to see the messages, if they can figure out how to unlock, so it's just
Yeah. I mean, there's always been an issue with copyright, but it seems like today, like people are getting desperate. Like like they're becoming all this paranoid, like saying, "Oh, copyright infringement." People are everywhere. It's like even some Blu-rays nowadays, you literally can't play them if you don't update, your Blu-ray's copyright device. It's like, why can't I watch a movie that I physically own?
or
And,
just
and here's
download a pirate player, because the Blu-ray DRM, I think it was actually compromised before it was even released. It didn't take long.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your last quickie that, DVDs, when they first came out, they tried, to be uber strict with their copyright, but they caved in because only less than a year afterwards, a 15-year-old actually figured out how to crack it, and he spread it on the internet, and then they were like, "Oh, what's the point?"
I know for a while they tried to do like disposable DVDs that would deteriorate.
Oh, the DivX devices, yeah. No one wanted those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get what's so obsessed with copyright, and
Well, and it looked like things were going a little better there for a while, because the music companies were realizing, hey, people want to listen on every device. And so, like it used to be, if you bought music off of Amazon, you got MP3s that had, no DRM. Now everything on Amazon is DRM'd.
yeah. It's pretty funny because a lot of people like to hate on Metallica because of how they acted to copyright, but from what I've read, Lars Ulrich, he actually said in a recent interview that while he still doesn't regret the lawsuit, he does now agree that he overreacted, which
Yeah.
is contradictory, but it's better than nothing. From what I've heard, I've even also heard from around the grapevine that Metallica themselves didn't personally hate, Napster as much as people gave it up, but the studio pressured them into saying, "No, you gotta hate it, you gotta despise it." And really, from what I heard, the only issue they had with Napster wasn't that it was quote unquote stealing their money. Rather, it was that someone used it to leak a song that hadn't been published yet. But that wasn't Napster's fault. That was someone in charge of their music records' fault.
All right, I think we got 2 minutes left in this if you want to start thinking about final thoughts and how we're going to wrap this up.
Have I lived my life to its fullest? I go wrong
Gotta
somewhere?
give-
But
gotta
there,
the
there is
turbo-
basically no way to make DRM without it being broken because
Yeah.
you have to decrypt it to display it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Rainbow Asteroid says, "Gotta give the turtle autopilot so it doesn't crash the wrong way and stop in front of an eagle."
Yep.
Now that's another thing. That's another thing that the state says. They're like, "Oh, but without the FAA, what's gonna stop planes from crashing into each other?" And I'm like, I don't know, but there's been quite a few incidences where planes crashed into each other because the regulators in charge of flight control messed up.
Well, Rainbow, there was this complete failure of an idea called DivX, DIVX. And the idea was it was kind of like pay-per-view, instead of like, you'd pay your cable company $1.99 and you could watch a movie for 3 days. You'd pay $1.99 and you get this DivX disc, and as soon as you opened the package, it would start to oxidize. And you could watch it as much as you wanted over the next 3 days, and then it wouldn't work anymore and you had to throw it away. No one wanted it, and it crashed and burned. This was like, I don't know, I think it was before the turn of the century, 98, 99, something
Yeah.
like that.
So contrary to what some people say, planned obsolescence doesn't exactly work the way you think it does because, I mean, that's the funny thing. People say, oh, they break down all the time, so you got to buy new ones. It's like, yeah, well, how come when everyone's actually tried doing that, the product ends up failing?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's like in the recent video I was talking about Walmart. People say, oh, Walmart's goods are shoddy. It's like, no, they're not. They can't be because, well, I don't think I actually made this point, but they can't make them be shoddy because Walmart has this extremely generous returns policy.
Yeah.
And so if you buy something and
it-
it's shoddy or it doesn't last, people are going back to get their money back.
And as another thing you
Yes.
pointed out, yeah, a lot of old school technology is pretty durable and it's practically indestructible. But a thing that often gets ignored is that it literally cost you an arm and a leg. That's how it's because it was super duper expensive.
Yeah, I mean, you had to spend a good chunk of your life just to afford a damn table, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you couldn't just go to, IKEA or somewhere and
Yeah,
buy a
I
table.
mean, that. Yeah,
All right, final thoughts, everyone.
nope,
Anything, Pip?
nope.
Can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay.
All right. Well, then I guess that is it for our February live stream. So as usual, thanks everyone who participated in the chat. Thanks everyone who participated in the voice chat. Thanks everyone who has supported this channel. And of course, thank you for watching. Until next time, stay strong.